Many of you won't know, but Andrew Brown is an ex-Westerfordian himself. He was suitably aggrieved that he was here in grade 9 when our principal, Mark Smith, was in matric. He remembered Mark Smith, but Mark Smith didn't remember him. But that's typical that matrics don't hold and understand the grade 9s, and he's still hurt and aggrieved over it. Okay, so we must contain him. He is also very proud to point out that on his board, his name is still up there, etc. More importantly, he also had kids who came to Westerford as well, and more importantly, they did history, so on and so forth. So we've got a shared experience of it as well. Okay, now, Andrew has come up with a number of books. His latest book, just before the unfolding horrors of Israel and Gaza, was published. It's called The Bitterness of Olives. We've got a copy of it in the library. This is the picture thing of it. I had the privilege, guys come in. I had the privilege of reading the book. It is an extraordinary book to read. Very insightful, and as a storyteller, Andrew takes you into the heart and the belly of the conflict in the Middle East. And it was just so happened it was before this peaking horror at the moment. I don't want to speak too much about the book itself. I encourage you all to read it. Andrew is going to share how he conceptualized it, how he researched it, what the story is about, and so on. We all know that we are engaged with the horrors of what's unfolding at the moment. And Andrew is going to engage with you in relation to it as well. I'm going to ask of him that he goes off-piste in terms of talking only about his book. Do you know what off-piste means? Okay, those who go. When you go skiing, and you're at the top of the mountain and snowing and you've got snow, etc. There are some people who go down and they go down the heavy section, and that's the black slopes, because they're quite good at skiing. And then you go down the green, red, or whatever the colors are. But you have some people who are really good skiers, and they say, no ways. And they look at the forest and everything, and they say, let's go for it. And they go, therefore, off-piste as they go down. Okay? Now, Andrew knows what some of the issues are which we are grappling with ourselves and so on in the context of his book. And so I'm going to encourage him to go off-piste. I won't therefore be able to follow him because I'm not as fast at skiing and so on as he goes through it. But he will offer the openness in the end for you guys posing questions and engaging your questions which you might have about the book, about the issues at stake and so on and so forth. With that, Andrew?
Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here.
Hello guys, thank you for being here. Nice to see you all. I'm quite surprised my previous principal left my name on. I might have gone and after I'd left, scratched it out. I'm a bit of a troublemaker at the school. But you are very lucky to be at this school. It's a school where this kind of debate is allowed and happening. There are many schools where it doesn't. So I'm delighted to have this opportunity to chat to you. I think there are 3 broad issues that come out of the book that I think you might be interested in. The first question is, whose story are we allowed to tell? And that's a debate that I've had as a writer. I've written 9 books now. I've had that debate with just about every author and writer I've ever met. Whose story are we entitled to tell? Can I tell somebody else's story? In this case, can I tell a story about conflict in the Middle East when I don't live in the Middle East? I happen to be Jewish. Does that mean I can tell a story about Jewish people? Can I tell a story about Muslim people? So the characters in my book, 2 main characters, 3 main characters. One is Jewish, one is Palestinian, and one is a historical character who actually comes from Iraq. Am I entitled to tell a story? I asked that question of a Zimbabwean writer who wrote a very beautiful book about memory. And she's a black woman from Zimbabwe. Her key character in that book was an Afrikaans man. And I said to her, how did she feel about writing his story? And her answer was, if if you're writing fiction, she feels you can tell anyone's story, so long as you tell it with integrity. So that's the first question I'd like to pose to you, and I'm going to give you lots of time to ask me questions, and I'd really like to hear from you what you think about that question. Whose stories can we tell? The second issue that comes out of the book, and I'm going to read you a very short paragraph from the book. Certainty was surely the poison of the world. If you thought you knew the outcome, why bother to undertake the journey at all? Conviction was the absence of thought, the dearth of alternative perspectives. The truth, on the other hand, was ambivalent and fun. It was elusive and precious. Once captured, it had to be held in the palm of two hands, protected as if in prayer, coloured like butterfly wings that can at any moment be buffeted by bluster. So the second point I'd like to put to you, and I'd like to hear as well about it, is currently there's probably not a more polarizing issue than what is happening in Gaza and in Israel. None of us live there. Many of you may have never visited, but you will have an opinion of it, and you'll be prepared to shout somebody else down who has a contrary opinion. Why is it such a polarizing debate when in fact it doesn't relate to where we live right now? It doesn't affect South Africa. All hell can break loose in the Middle East. We're sitting in Cape Town quite happily. Why do we care so much? Why is it so polarizing? And how do you navigate? And that's been a big issue for me with this book. This book was released 3 weeks before the Al-Aqsa storm of Hamas. I didn't see it coming. I don't think anybody saw it coming. It was shocking and startling. That makes it very hard for me to then navigate this book and the issues. People say, well, what position do you take? Do you support Israel? Do you support the Palestinians? What do you say about Hamas? What do you say about the Israeli defense? And I think you as young people, I'm sure your parents have got strong views, I'm sure you sit around the dinner table, you're hearing lots of people, lots of views. The question is, how do you navigate? What foundation do you use to navigate? And I'd like to suggest to you, as I've said in that paragraph in the book, what's important is not your position. I feel it's dangerous to take a position on things because often you then need to backtrack. So let's say I decide I'm a Zionist and I now put my name up in colours and I say, this is what I am, this is my position, I'm a Zionist. Israel has just killed 3,000 children in Gaza. How do I, if I'm saying I am a Zionist, now must I try and defend that? Must I defend my position against somebody who says, but that's an act of terror? It's indefensible. And so my position then becomes under attack. I become polarized and I resort to screaming and shouting rather than debate. But what I'd like to suggest to you as a way of navigating these issues is don't take a position, take a principle. So go back to principles and allow your principles to navigate your way through these issues. So my principles are fundamental human rights. That's what I believe. I believe that everyone has a right to equality. I believe that everyone has a right to freedom of association. I believe that everyone has a right to freedom of movement, access to healthcare, access to education, dignity, a lack of discrimination, a lack of oppression. Now, once you start taking those principles and start applying them to the situation, I think it gives you a way of navigating the way through. So, if you are currently born Palestinian in Gaza, it wasn't your choice, you're now born a child in Gaza, you have less rights, less human rights than a prisoner on death row of serial murder. Think about that for a moment. If you are a murderer on death row, your freedom of movement is restricted. but you still can associate with who you want in prison. You can get reading material of whatever you want in prison. Prisoners are still allowed to vote. You have access to healthcare. Prisons have clinics, hospitals. You can have access to education if you want. You can go online and join an educational course. Palestinian child in Palestine has increasingly less access to healthcare, education. There is no freedom of movement. There's very little freedom of association. The internet is shut down. Cell phones are shut down. There's no way of communicating in and out. People are starving. There's no access to clean water. There's no access to electricity. So now you apply your principle to that, and your principles tell you that is unacceptable. Not because of your position, not because I support Hamas, but because I have fundamental human rights and I can apply to a situation. And so my suggestion to you is in this incredibly polarizing debate, go back to the foundation, and probably the easiest foundation to go back to is others should be treated as you would want to be treated. And if you apply that to every situation, I think it will allow you to navigate your way through whatever that situation is. And it sounds a bit soft. I know it sounds a bit soft. Treat others as you would have yourself treated. But if you actually unpack it and think about it, it's such a fundamental and important basic starting point of how we should be dealing with big issues like Gaza, like Israel, and small issues, interpersonal relations, how you deal with debates in school. I know that you guys have been through a bit of a process about how to have discussions and how to have debates in school. And for me, the fundamental starting point there is, again, don't take a position. Teacher Tucker over there, she may have a different position to me. Does that mean we can't have a conversation about it? Well, if we are entrenched in our positions, yes, we can't have a conversation. She will be defending hers, I will be defending mine. But if we're applying basic principles to it, we can debate anything. And we can debate it safely. Why not? I don't think there's anything we wouldn't be able to do. So that's my suggestion. The third issue that for me comes out of the book, and I'm also going to read a little bit from the book, and this is a little bit longer, but it makes a point that I would like to make to you. So in this book there are three characters. The third character is a historical character. She's a woman who is born in Iraq, in Ramadi. Now, when you think of Iraq, you may think of the Iraqi wars, you may think of the obliteration of Baghdad by the American troops, you may think of the ongoing terrorism that is happening in Iraq. What you probably don't know is that not so long ago, not even 100 years ago, Iraq was a homogeneous group of Jews and Muslims living together in absolute harmony in a community where everyone was respected. And I'm not saying that to make it sound flowery and lovely, that's just how it was. So the finance minister of Iraq was Jewish. He was a practicing Jew. He had a synagogue. He went, he had a rabbi. He practiced his religion, together with hundreds and thousands of other Jews who lived in Iraq, side by side with their Arab neighbors. When you think of where we are now in the world, it's quite a startling thought. So, this is a section in the book about her life in Ramadi. And I'll just read you a little bit of it. We spoke Arabic at home, and Hebrew was limited to a few prayers and songs. I never really understood the language as a child, but I sang along to the verses I knew by rote. My sister Mariam, who was 2 years older than me, taunted me by pretending to talk in Hebrew to her friends. I have no doubt the words were just garbled noises and designed simply to bully me. She was a dreadfully bossy sibling, always knowing better, quick to find fault. Friday night prayers were at home, and a meal always shared with extended family. Saturday mornings we would make our way to the synagogue, although children rarely spent time inside, skipping stones along the dirt courtyard on the outside. For my father, life in Ramadi was a seamless world of difference, a conglomeration of varying cultures, yes, but all essentially focused on simply establishing grounds for a good life. Whether you praised Moses in Arabic or Hebrew, whether you went to shul or mosque, whether you prayed on Friday afternoon or Friday evening, these were incidental manifestations of background. It was no more significant than whether you washed your clothes on a Sunday or a Monday, or ate fish soup every day, or only once a week. So, how did we get from that to where we are now, where we can't even talk about other people's experiences and perspectives? What has gone so wrong so quickly in less than 100 years? That piece that I've written in the book is centered around about 1935. Now, I know to you that sounds like dinosaurs were running the world, but I promise they weren't. 1935 is not so long ago. It's just before the Second World War started. My mom was alive. In the few years up until 1948, 10, 13, 15 years is all it took for that community to go from that to Jews fleeing to set up a new homeland in Israel, Arab nationalism taking root. We obviously had German nationalism during the Second World War. And from there, it's been a downhill slope of conflict in the Middle East. But it happened so quickly, and it's so deeply and so fundamentally. And now we've reached this point where I fear that even talk of a two-state solution has died. Now, whatever your position, whatever your position or your principles might be on what the solution is, one of the solutions, and it was a possibility that seemed to have some traction, was a two-state solution. And nationalism has reached a point when even that doesn't seem to be possible. Even the diplomats in the EU and Geneva are conceding that even that is impossible. So we've got so far down the line that we can barely talk to each other about these things, let alone find a solution. And it's very deeply troubling to me that we were able to move that quickly downhill. And like so many things in life, once you've gone down, it's quite hard to go up. It's unlike the petrol price. Once it goes up, it's very hard to bring it down. But with these kinds of things, once you've slumped, it's very hard to pick yourself back up. And because there's so much hurt, there's so much scar, it's so difficult to reach out and bridge the gaps. I don't know how we do it, but it just surprises me and distresses me. And the answer probably lies with you and not the old people like me. The answers probably lie with young people who need to work out what has gone wrong and how do we change this? Because we can't carry on like this. There's no doubt we cannot carry on like this. I'm probably too old and tired to try to change it. Tried to change things in the 80s. That went reasonably well. Occasional prison term here and there, but it went reasonably. But now we are handing it to you. You are the young guys who are going to have to take over. You are going to have to think about this. And just because we're living on the tip of Africa in paradise doesn't mean we're living for it, because it's everywhere. One of my previous books was in Sudan. I spent time in South Sudan. Exactly the same thing. I went to Sudan full of hope, full of idealism. North and South Sudan had been at war for centuries. They finally said, you know what, let's stop. You can have this, you can have North Sudan, we'll have South Sudan. Let's split it in the middle. They declared peace, they split it in the middle. It was like 1994 in this country, where we were all on the streets celebrating. South Sudan went mad. This was peace and paradise forevermore. And in my idealism, I rushed off to South Sudan to be part of it. And within 2-3 months, civil war broke out. And people were at each other's throats again, and it hasn't stopped since. And it's this idea of nationalism, of I identify myself as this, you are not, you are different, and therefore I'm prepared to fight you, I'm prepared to disagree with you. And I find it extraordinary, old anti-idealist that I am, I'm hoping that young people like you, with an education that you're getting at this school, will be able to see through that kind of mist and nonsense and find a way that is better. So that would be my hope. Gordon, have you got questions for me or things you would like to raise?
I think that, Andrew, if you can just speak about your primary characters,
Yeah.
because it does resonate with our own history in South Africa and so on. That the story is largely centered around two characters and an incident. And that incident then brings the two characters together. One is in Israel, a police official, a cop. And he is investigating cases of murder, of anybody who murdered. He carries the docket as an investigator. But he works with a pathologist. Now, a pathologist is a doctor who works with corpses to work out how they died. Okay? Medical doctor. And that person happens to be an Arab Palestinian. And they work very closely together, much to the not comfortableness of everybody else in Israel who knows they work together to solve these cases. And maybe you can speak to that undercurrent as well. But then they investigate one particular case where the pathologist is firmly of the opinion this is a cover-up. And we know of many cover-ups in the new South Africa, let alone the old South Africa, okay? So it's very real to us, it's a cover-up. The investigator doesn't believe there's a cover-up. So, and in the end, that's the straw which breaks the camel's back, where this Arab medical doctor, pathologist says, I'm out of here. And he moves into Gaza. So now the one is in Israel, the other's in Gaza. And then an incident comes where the pathologist in Gaza needs the assistance of the Israeli cop. And how they covertly communicate with each other. And how they eventually, through the trauma which both have, manage to engage over this particular issue. And I think it's pertinent in terms of our own South African history, and in terms of positionality as well. Andrew has also committed himself to being a reservist policeman in the new South Africa and so on. So it's a realm of stuff which he is interested in, kind of thing. So obviously it comes into this. If you can talk to that, and how we relate it to South Africa, it's really important. We've got to understand our own experiences here in terms of what is unpacked there. Okay.
So yeah, to carry on from what Gordon's raising, it's also about having different positions. So as an Arab Palestinian, and again, you may not know this, there are Arab Palestinians who live in Israel itself, this country. They're not many, but they are there. And they have positions in administration, government, wherever. So this character, Khalid, is a doctor who's working as a pathologist in Israel and is increasingly under pressure from his family, his wife, his extended family, that this isn't okay. It's not okay to be part of the Israeli security apparatus as a Palestinian. He, on the other hand, loves his job. So he is trying to separate his job out from the politics of it, from how he's being perceived by his family. And eventually, because of, as Gordon was saying, there is a fallout, he believes that certain things are being covered up. He acquiesces to his family's pressure and he moves to Gaza. And he regrets it enormously. Gaza is the world's biggest open-air prison. And he has gone from a degree of freedom into imprisonment and oppression in Gaza. And he's working as a doctor at Al-Shifa Hospital. If you watch the news, those terrible scenes of children being rushed into and out of hospital, that hospital is Al-Shifa. It's the biggest hospital in Gaza City. and it's currently one of the few hospitals that is in fact operating. And so those dreadful scenes that you see if you watch the news, that's where it's happening. So a lot of the book is set in that hospital. He is a doctor in the hospital. And so firm lines are drawn. His previous friend, who's an Israeli detective, is now the enemy. He won't talk to him. Khalid has chosen Gaza. His previous Israeli friend now cannot relate to him. He's gone and chosen the extremists of Gaza. And so the two of them have drifted apart and will have nothing to do with each other. And the book is really about the two of them starting to make bridges and starting to make contact and overcoming those kinds of obstacles that exist between them. I think there's a story there for all of us about overcoming those kinds of divides that we put up. And what the book is suggesting is that those divides that they've set up are false divides. They are real divides, and I'll describe for you in a moment what Gaza is like. They are real divides when it comes to Gaza. But between the two of them, in fact, as they start to work again and start to put out feelers, they realize that these other divides, these positional divides, are false and are in fact easily overcome when your goal is something that is lower and military. To tell you a little bit about Gaza itself. So Gaza is about 40 kilometers long and about 10 kilometers wide. So that makes it more or less the size of the Cape Peninsula, I suppose. It's got 2.5 million people packed into it. So that makes it one of the densest populated places on Earth. So when you drop a bomb on it, you are going to be killing a lot of people and they're going to be civilians. So an idea of a targeted strike or something like that, it's just nonsense. It's like dropping a bomb in the middle of Manenberg because you're trying to catch a gangster, literally. So that's why we have currently over 8,000 civilians killed. Now that's a hard number to get your head around, but 3,000 of those are children. I don't know how many children there are, students there are in the West of it.
About 1,000.
About 1,000. Okay, so let's take 3 entire West of it, all of you from West of it, 3 times over, put you in a stadium and bomb you. That's Gaza right now. 3,000 children. And it's inevitable. You drop a bomb on a place that's that densely populated, a lot of people are going to die. You can't get in or out of Gaza. So it is a prison. There is a wall and a fence. Some of you might have seen that, where Hamas managed to break through. So there is a wall and a fence all around Gaza. I tried to get in and I got detained by the Israeli Defense Force for my efforts. There is one crossing in and out called areas, and at the moment and for the last few years, no one is allowed in and out of areas. A few years before that, you were allowed in for the day if you had a permit. This may be resonating a little bit with some of your South African history. You were given a permit to leave Gaza to go and work in Israel for the day, but you had to be back before sunset through Areas Crossing. So Areas Crossing would have 1,000 people going out with permits and 1,000 people coming back in. And that's how controlled it was. Now not even that happens, it is entirely locked down. Electricity comes from Israel, so they've turned the switch off. Water comes from Israel, they've turned that off too. So you are locked into a prison in which nothing is being provided. And when the Israeli Defense Force say, well, now you must move south so we can bomb the north, there's nowhere to go to. Like you start bombing Rondebosch and say, okay, we're going to bomb Rondebosch and now you all need to go to Claremont. It's 2.5 million people, it's not really feasible. So that idea is just not doable. So that's what Gaza looks like. What's fascinating for me, and one of the parallels with South Africa, none of you grew up under apartheid, but the older folk in this room did. And we know what it was like. And we know that a lot of the time, life was normal or felt. A lot of the time, you weren't aware that you were living in systemic oppression. It wasn't oppression against us, oppression against people of color. But You could go to the beach and have an ice cream. You could go to a restaurant and have a meal. You could go to a movie. It wasn't that you felt this constant presence of what was apartheid. It was inherent in our lives. It was part of our lives. And it became normalized. If you go to Israel, you go to Tel Aviv, it is bizarre to me, but it is exactly the same. Gaza is not far away. There are 2.5 million people living in oppression in a prison, simply because they're Palestinian. They haven't done anything, they're just Palestinian, therefore that's where they live. You can go to Tel Aviv and go to the beach and have an ice cream. You can go and have one of the nicest swims on one of the nicest beaches you will ever come across. You might get shouted at by a lifeguard if you swim out too far. You will be surrounded by happy people who play beach balls. You can sink into Israeli life and not think about a Palestinian person. You cannot think about the oppression in the West Bank. It is so similar to what we experienced in this country. And that's partly why what has happened has happened. Now you may have different views on the Al-Aqsa storm of Hamas and what they did. I apply my human rights principles to it. I feel, from my point of view, it is indefensible and was a human rights abuse. Killing 1,400 people, of whom at least 1,000 were innocent and not members of the military, I find indefensible because I apply my principles to it. But whatever you feel about it, however you work your head around what happened, the truth of it is, it was inevitable because people had forgotten. Not only just Israelis had forgotten, who were living life very normally and very happily, but the world had forgotten as well. Saudi Arabia was sidling up to Israel and going to do a deal where they recognized Israel and entered into economic ties. Now Saudi Arabia is one of the big powerhouses in the Muslim world in the Middle East. They were going to enter into that deal without the word Palestine or Palestinian appearing anywhere in the agreement, not once. So they were prepared to do a deal with Israel in which Palestinian question, for want of a better phrase, wasn't even on the agenda. Same for Qatar, same for the UAE, same for Turkey. Turkey is a big powerhouse. They were entering into negotiations with Israel. I was in the UAE recently and I heard 2 languages other than Arabic. I heard Russian and I heard Hebrew. Lots and lots of Israelis in the UAE doing business. Palestinians were not on the agenda at all. So it was inevitable that at some point, Hamas, which by the way is the democratically elected governing body of Gaza, people forget that as well, Hamas was going to do something. And they did. Now, whether you want to try and defend what they did or not, that we can have a debate on. But they were going to do something. And they certainly did. And now, everybody is talking about the plight of Palestinians. Has anybody spoken about Ukraine for the last 3 weeks? Mr. Zelensky is jumping up and down saying, what about me? What about me? Don't forget me. We are talking about what do we do about Gaza? What do we do about the Palestinians? So to some extent, Hamas has succeeded in its goals. To another extent, it's a complete and utter disaster. Gaza is being flattened, and as I said, soon we will have 10,000 corpses on the ground. And whether Hamas intended that or not, I don't know, but that is a disastrous outcome of everything. But I think there is that strong parallel with what happened in South Africa. That it was too easy to forget and ignore. And to some extent, the armed struggle in South Africa was never going to beat the South African military. It hadn't a hope of ever beating the South African military. Hamas has not a chance of ever beating the Israeli military. That's not what it's about. It's not what arms struggle is. What it does is it raises the flag on the issue and saying, you can't forget I am here. I'm not going away, and I'm prepared to die for my rights. And so you have to start talking to me. And again, one can have a long debate about armed struggle and civilian tolerance. How do I personally navigate it? I navigate it, as we said right in the beginning, by not having a position, but applying my basic principles of human rights. So I don't believe that civilian targets are justified. But you may have another view. But so long as it's not a position you're taking, so long as it's something you've thought through based on your principles, you're entitled to it. So if you believe that Israel has a right to exist independently, that's okay. We can have that conversation. But it must be because you've thought about it and you've applied your principles to the facts as you know, and not because you're taking a position, you're putting a stick in the sand and saying, this is who I am, and I identify myself in a particular way. You're all bright enough and educated enough to undertake that process, that you don't need to take a position. And if I may also say so, don't just take your parents' positions, because we often do. And we often haven't thought of. So when you hear your parents' position at the supper table, you don't have to have a fight about it, but don't just slick it down together with your food. Think about it. What is an adult saying at the dinner table? Do you agree with it or not? Why are they saying it? Do they know something you don't know? Maybe they have more facts than you. Maybe they don't. Maybe they're just taking a position and they're prepared to defend it.
Guys, before I pose another question to Andrew out of his book to comment on, is there any question of clarity or anything which you guys want to ask at this stage? Can I pose the other question? In the book itself, the woman who is born in Iraq, who ends up in Gaza, ends up having a grandchild, I can't remember the grandchild's name, who is a militant. Can you talk to the issue as a storyteller and the research which you've done in terms of how to unpack an understanding of and a recognition in trauma of the rage and rebellion of people? We've got to keep in mind, I would suggest, that when we're talking about the area Gaza and Palestinians in Gaza, a large proportion, the greater proportion, are actually youth. They have been born into Gaza, their family have been exiled for 75 years and so on. So it's generational trauma, but there's that deep rage and feeling of catastrophe. But at the same time, when militants go in on the 7th of October into Israel, you can also recognize the rage and catastrophe of people who lost family members and so on, civilians in Israel. And the problem with that recognizing that rage, they want revenge. And that also becomes the problem, unguided as well. If you can talk in terms of that character, the youth, the youngsters, in terms of the rage, the rebellion, and the revenge, and they'll do anything in the end.
Maybe I can answer it from a different perspective, a bit tangential. I've been a cop for 25 years, and for 10 of those I was in the gang unit. So spent a lot of time in camp flats, dealing with gangs in a confrontational way. And I must say I'm very pleased to be out of it, not only for my personal safety, but because it feels like a dead end. It feels as though, in a way, as a police officer, I'm part of the problem and certainly not part of the solution. And the reason I say that is, imagine that you are young, poor, and born to here. the bad part of Americana who delved us out. Your father is perhaps a gangster, or perhaps he's not alive anymore. Your options are so limited. Your only friend is someone who's older than you, who's part of a gang. He becomes a father figure, a friend figure. Through him, you have access to pocket money, recognition, nothing else in your life that's going to go right. But this could be something that gives you meaning, direction, and maybe even money. What are your chances of refusing it? What are your chances of saying, no, I'm going to be the better person, I'm not going to join the gang. I'm going to go and be unemployed but do good work somewhere. The chances of that are almost zero. You would have to be some kind of very, very special human being. Imagine you are a Palestinian and you're currently 16 years old. Unemployment in Gaza is at 80%. You have no job. I can guarantee you, you are never getting a job. Now you are in Gaza and you're being harassed by Israeli police every time you go near the border fence of your prison. You're not allowed out. The water makes you ill. The electricity, you think we've got load shedding. The electricity is constantly being turned on. You've got nowhere to go and nothing to do, and no prospect. That rage that Paul was talking about is going to build in you. Every day you see people killed. Every day you see people harassed and oppressed. And that's every day for the rest of their life. The rage that I saw in young gangsters is the same rage that you see in Palestinian youth who've got no prospects of anything. And to judge them is very difficult because we don't know what that's like. The options that you have coming through this school, coming from your background, the options are endless. The world is your oyster. You're going to struggle to make choices. You're going to have so many choices to make. You're not going to know which way to go. Imagine having no choices and then identifying the reason I have no choices. The reason my life is what it is because of these people. And you can identify them. And there they are in uniform with their guns, and there they are killing their friends. Why would you not have it? Why would you not decide to be militant? Why would you not take up arms such as that? And so, this idea that Hamas can be eradicated by dropping bombs from the sky and now going in on the ground, it's crazy. It's like sending me into Mannenberg and saying, shoot every male of 14 years and older. And let's say I'm mad enough to do that. And I go in and I shoot every male on the street in Delft South. Have I solved the problem? I've made a massive problem, a much bigger problem. Every single person under the age of 14 who saw me do that just wants my blood. Now that is what happens if you bomb people and kill 8,000 and counting with no end goal. What is the solution? And I think that's what distresses me most about what we see happen right now, is that no one has an end goal. The end goal is violence. Netanyahu has said so. I mean, the quote that he took from the Bible yesterday was just astonishing. He said, the Bible says there's a time for war. This is a time for war, so there will be no ceasefire. He's a world leader of a large military power. To say something like that is absolutely sad. What is his end goal? How does he see this coming to an end, and what's the solution? The answer is he doesn't. He doesn't have an end goal. It's retribution. It's not a solution. And that can never work. It's just making the problem even bigger. So, yeah, it's very, very distressing. And even though we are not part of it, it affects us at a moral level, at an emotional level. And I understand that the debates get heated. understand that people take positions. My only advice is to go back to what I said at the beginning. Apply your principles to it, to see what happens. Are there any questions? Otherwise, I'm going to start picking on you and asking you one. Holly.
I have one, please, Andrew.
Yeah. So Holly and I are old friends. So you know.
Older than we'd like to. I guess a question about output for people coming to hear this talk. What are you, as somebody who has been to the location, written books, and also been a part of the anti-apartheid struggle, what do you think the best way, other than the opinions and taking not a positional stance, but in discussion, so other than discussion, what do you think is the way for young people to contribute to the betterment? Because as you say, we're how many kilometers away? How do we, what is your opinion, having seen it in the past years, having seen it now to write the book, what's the best way for young people, other than discussions, to contribute positively to trying to find some type of betterment of the calamity that's happening?
I think it's a very hard question, because the question preceding that is it for us to do anything? So it's not our fight. We're not Palestinian, we're not Israeli, we don't live in the Middle East. Why do we care? It doesn't matter if we care. And I've had this debate with people a lot before. We get het up about Mr. Putin invading Ukraine. Does it matter what I think? Does Mr. Putin care what Andrew Brown thinks in Cape Town? I suspect not. It's hurtful, but I think that he actually probably doesn't care. And so, to what extent does it matter what we think, what we know, and even to what extent does it matter whether we find out the facts or not? Isn't it better to live in ignorance? Isn't it happier to live in ignorance? Oh, I don't know what's going on. And I don't care because it doesn't affect me, so I'm getting on with my life. And I think at a basic, fundamental human level, that's wrong. I think it does matter to you. You have to try and make sense of it. You can't escape it. If you turn on the news to watch the rugby, you're going to be aware there's going to be someone with a Palestinian flag in the audience. If you go in to watch the weather, you're going to get a weather report, but you're probably also going to catch something on that's going to tell you about what's happening at the moment. You can't avoid it. Your parents will be talking about it. There will be other people. There will be friends. Teachers will be talking about it. So I don't think one can just ignore it. I think you have to try and make sense of it. So I think that's the first step, is just to recognize that we need to understand world politics. We need to understand world events. We need to understand what's going on. Then the second question, as Holly raises, is, well, then what do you do about it? What are you doing about Myanmar right now? Do any of us really know what's going on in Myanmar right now? No. I know there's a lot of oppression going on in Myanmar. A lot of people have died. And I did know what happened 2 years ago, but I don't know what happened now. Can I know everything? Do I need to get emotional about everything? Do I have the emotional energy to get up about everything? No. So, to some extent, pick your battles, but do try and understand what's happening in the world, because it informs your own world, and I think it's important to have a grasp of it. So some things are right now beyond my understanding. The United Nations had a resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. It wasn't a long-term ceasefire, it was a short ceasefire to allow humanitarian aid. I can't imagine that anybody would think that's a bad idea. The United Kingdom abstained from voting in favour, and the United States voted against it. So these are the two of the big superpowers. One abstained, saying, well, we don't really know, so we're not going to vote for it. The other one voted against it by saying, I think we should stop killing each other. Can we just have a moment's break to talk about it? And you say, no, I don't think that's a good idea. So, there's some things that are just sort of beyond one. And to speak to Holly's question, it's outrageous. Should we now go and protest outside the American embassy? Yes, we probably all should. But we should also be protesting outside the Indonesian embassy, and we should certainly be protesting outside the Israeli embassy. On and on and on it goes. So I think in terms of the current conflict, what can you do? The first thing is inform yourself and reach a viewpoint that is not a firm position, but is based on an understanding and application to a principle, and then discuss that with others who might have a different viewpoint, without fighting, without calling names, without labeling, but just have a conversation about why do other people feel differently. And it'll be useful because it'll either change your mind or it will make you realize that actually your application of your principles feels right. So have a debate with someone who feels that the state of Israel should exist and has a right to defend itself. Have that conversation with someone. They're not mad. They're human beings like you, and they've got a particular viewpoint. Talk to them about it. You probably will disagree, but you may not. And they may change the way you think about it. Say, I hadn't thought of it. I still disagree with you, but I hadn't thought of it. So have those conversations. And then when you've reached a viewpoint on it, I do believe that peaceful protest is a solid way to go, and I do think, strangely enough, that people take notice. Not always, but I do think that, for example, what has happened in Turkey or Saudi Arabia. So let's take Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia, the king, who is all-powerful and almighty, took a decision that Saudi Arabia is going to be friendly with Israel, didn't put the Palestinians on the agenda, and the Al-Aqsa storm happened. He didn't say anything about it. He didn't comment on either point, he just kind of backed away and waited to see what would happen. But his population came out. The Saudis came onto the street by their hundreds of thousands. And they said, what is happening in Gaza is unacceptable. And they clogged the streets with protesters. And now the Sheikh of Saudi has rethought things and said, okay, actually, and he's called for a ceasefire. He wasn't calling for a ceasefire until he saw which way his population was going. So there is power in peaceful protest and putting your hand up and saying, this isn't acceptable. And that doesn't necessarily mean, I'm sorry to harp on it, but I think it's important, it doesn't mean taking a position. So you don't go to a peaceful protest that has Palestinian flags because you are anti-Israel, because you're anti-Jewish, because you're anti-anything else. You might be. I hope you've thought that through carefully if you are. But you're not there because you have a position. Your position is it's wrong to commit this kind of human rights abuse on innocent people. There needs to be a ceasefire. There needs to be aid getting into Gaza. And there needs to be a solution. We can't just go back to where we were before. Think this through. What is the solution? And then I think the last thing you can do, and it's the hardest, is think about what a solution is. And it really is hard. I mean, there are no easy answers. My personal position is a very unfavorable one, and not many people agree with me, but I believe in a single-state solution in the state of Palestine. Now, it's very easy to say that, and it's very idealistic to say that, and very romantic to say that, and it sounds good. But when someone starts asking you questions, okay, that sounds great, now how's this going to work? What's Jerusalem going to look like? What are we going to do with the level of scar tissue that exists between the sides? Very easy to say, oh, well, we should, and that's why I read you that portion from the book about what Iraq looked like not even 100 years ago. We've moved so far from living together. You go to shul and I go to mosque, and then we play on the streets afterwards. We've moved so far away from that, so quickly. How on earth do we ever get back to it? And that's where, fortunately, I can hand the mantle over to you guys, and you can help this love. And you guys can pick it up and try and sort it out, because my generation messed it up. That's how your generation gets to do the repair.
Thanks.
Can I suggest, if you've got any questions or whatever, I've just got to thank Andrew on behalf of all of you, let you go off so you can go to the bathroom and so on before getting into class. But Andrew's here, so if you've got a question, come and ask him.
Yeah,
Is that okay?
Absolutely.
So on behalf of everybody here, Andrew, thank you very much for taking the time out, coming and sharing your wise words with them as well, as everybody engages with these issues and in what is a very complex issue. But I think, as you referred at the end as an idealist, there's nothing wrong in dreaming.
Yes.
But then try to work out making the dream a reality. That's the challenge. Okay. Guys, on behalf of all
Thank you,
thank you
everyone.
very much.